Next set of questions has to do with communications. First question is, how do you keep in touch without scheduled meetings or newsletters, etc.?
Well, we've done different things over time. But I think I'd have to ask you, how do you know what time dinner is tomorrow night? You may not know now, but sometime tomorrow you'll probably know. And if dinner's a priority, you'll be there. You know, if it's not a priority, then maybe you didn't get enough notice, and so you'll skip it. You know, that kind of thing. But, you know, if it's really a priority, as a family, there's not a problem communicating. If it's really a fabric of life that's accentuated by putting into practice His words and helping each other do that, and it's built on relationship, not externals, communication really is no problem at all. And prove that point, you know, again, for years and years, we've never had a newsletter per se, or announcements, or anything like that. For a short span of time, we had a bulletin board thing that people could call in and find out what's going on, and when the different gatherings were going to be and all that, and we really just got rid of that. It wasn't even necessary. It hasn't slowed us down a bit. Not a single person ever would not know about a gathering. I mean, like I said, it's been 8 years now. If it was going to happen, it would happen by now. That I don't know of a single instance where somebody said, "Boy, I didn't even know about that gathering last night." But see, if there's a big periphery where people just are not connected to the head or the body, and you can't be connected to one without the other. You're baptized by one Spirit into one body so that you're connected. 1 Corinthians 12. I mean, read that whole chapter. It's very clear what God's heart is about that. It's not man's experience for the most part, but it is God's heart and God's mind about it. In any event, if we're really living out what God says the church is, then there's going to be a communication in an organic way. It's like, if you've been married to somebody for several years and somebody comes to the door selling something, candy or brushes or whatever, do you really have to go ask them if they would like it? Or do you perhaps have an idea of what they would like? Well, that's really Patty. That's really Karen. That's really Cindy. Boy, that they would like that. You just have an innate sense that because your mind is similar to theirs, your heart and your mind are drawn together, you're going to be able to come to grips with things that communications really become less and less necessary as your lives are more and more intertwined. Verbal communication isn't the highest form of communication. It's not from God. Verbal communication, audible voice from God, is not His highest form of communication. He's done that historically. It's easy to document that in the Bible, but Jesus said, hey, this is for you guys that don't really know the Father. I don't need that. That was His response to an audible voice from heaven. And so our relationship with God, as Jesus had a relationship with God, becomes less and less dependent on externals like that. And in the body of Christ, it's also true that if we're really one heart, one mind, one purpose, of one accord, contending as one man for the faith, there's something about being in love with each other that allows us to be able to communicate in a rapid-fire sort of way, where people aren't just at the whim and will of some sort of technological communication system. And I can't explain it except just say to you, try it. It works in your family, and it can work in God's family too, and has and does work in God's family, where we're really devoted one to another, and word spreads. Whether anything ever hit a telephone even or not, people would know. The word would get out because of the relationships that people have. And because people desire that with all their heart, they don't even need 3 days' notice and to be in a set schedule and lasting a certain amount of time. That's not where it comes from. That's not to say there aren't details that need to get worked out. If there's a sick child or whatever, yeah. But if people are really family, it's just not a problem. You're going to find those needs. People are already aware of those needs. They think of it before you do. Again, there are always challenges and difficulties, but the closer we are to God's pattern, God's heart, God's model of family, the more these kinds of communication problems and logistics, they don't have to be handled with the satellite dish and all the technology of man to make things happen. It's just not necessary.
Acts 2 didn't use a newsletter and they all made it to the meeting.
Yeah. In Acts 2, the people that God wanted to be there were there. without any flyers or any announced sermon topic or speaker of the hour, poster on the pole or anything like that.
Okay. Don't some people feel or get left out? I think that was kind of answered.
Yeah, we've kind of answered that, I think. You know what, though? See, an interesting side point of this easy yes or no question that, once again, I'm going to blow by going into great detail. It's interesting that a person who is walking in darkness, in other words, if I'm trying to hide something in my life, if I'm just taken off to the mall to wander through and lust over the material world's goods, or I have a secret life somehow that isn't in the light, that isn't in a serious consecration to God. I'm living two lives rather than one, seeking first His kingdom. If that happens, then I can be in the middle of several hundred people. By experience, we've seen people right in the middle of 100 fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, but they don't feel it. They feel left out because they're spiritually not in touch with the head. They're also disconnected from the body too. If I'm not doing well spiritually, I will tend to feel alone, like people are ignoring me or neglecting me or not meeting my needs or paying attention to me or respecting me as much as they should other people or including me in the whole slew of people that went off to go do something together. How did I get left out? If my heart and my spirit are not right, then somehow I will be, even though saved, I will find myself outside of the life of God and the flow of the river. I'll be in an eddy current off on the side of this river rather than driving down the middle of the river the way that God intends for us all to be. So, if we put a rock in the way in our river, in God's river of His body, if we put a rock of some sort of sin or selfishness or hidden thing in our heart and life, if we're living for ourselves rather than for others and for Jesus, we're putting a rock in the way, and we will find ourselves in that eddy current and tend to feel left out. But that's one of God's tools to annoy us and to make us aware that perhaps we're not in fellowship with the Godhead. See, if I'm walking in the light, then we will have fellowship one with another, and our joy will be complete. I'm not joyful, and I don't have fellowship one with another. What's that mean? Everybody else's fault? Or perhaps I'm not walking in the light where Jesus and everybody else is. I don't have 100 fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters. Is that everybody else's fault? Or maybe it's because I haven't lost my life for Jesus' sake. I'm still living for myself, and therefore God's promise doesn't apply to me. And so I feel lonely while everybody else is having a blast. So you could feel left out if the church is really the church, but not if you love Jesus with all your heart. It isn't going to happen because you're going to be right in the middle of the river of God's purposes and having fun doing it. But God does teach us through that means at times when we're getting off track.